And okay, so when you launch CAD, right, I have that base drawing set up. You also have your traverse drawing. Okay, there's some settings that you modified in that you can work in your traverse drawing. You can create a new drawing. It's entirely up to you. Word of caution, right? You want to be working from a hard drive, an external, a USB. I've had issues with working on like the Google Drive and it's staying connected. So it runs faster. Like right now, I'm running off of an external hard drive. Okay. It's a little more stable. The other thing is, how many people typically use Google Docs or Google Sheets as opposed to Excel and Word? It's much more common, right? It's also much more stable. How many people have ever had Google Sheets crash on them and just stop working? It's pretty rare. It happens, but it's pretty rare, agreed? Oh, it happens pretty rare. Okay.
The internet causes a lot of issues.
Okay. Because of the data, the amount of data this thing crunches, you want to save regularly. You don't want to work even a half hour without fitting a save in, because you don't want to lose stuff, right? So just make sure you're saving. I don't want an email like the day before something's due and like, I lost 3 hours worth of work. Then I'm forced to say too bad, so just make sure you're saving. Even if like you start it and you want to do a test save to make sure that it's working properly, probably a good idea. Another thing, Google, YouTube, there's so many videos out there to do the same thing, okay? I'm gonna post this video online, but in addition to this, CAD itself, you see this big question mark in the upper right corner? If you click on that, see this tab for videos? They have their own video for importing and creating base data and creating a model of a surface. Pretty handy. Am I saying you have to use this? No, I'm saying it's another good tool and resource. So if what I'm saying isn't making sense, take a peek at that, see if it does. Nice, everyone's here. So everybody has the same opportunity to hear what I'm about to say. Some people had asked about extra credit. I will give you an extra credit on the last test if by Wednesday you send me either an email, send me a one-page memo. I've shown you where the subdivision and land development ordinance and the zoning ordinance are for Lower Macungie Township. Did I not? Okay. We talked about subdivisions. One of the things you're going to need to know to create your subdivision is the minimum radius of your roadway. Roadways have classifications. For your subdivision, do you think that we're doing a limited access collector road? You don't have to know what that is. Does that sound like what you're going to do for a neighborhood? No, that's a highway. What you're looking for is a local road standard. So that's the lowest classification of roadway that's going to go through your development. Look on Lower Macungie's website, find me the minimum radius for a local road, and I'll give you extra. Questions about that?
Radius.
Radius. Minimum center line radius of a local road. Any other questions about that? Tomorrow. Yes.
Did you say send it in a one-page memo?
Yep. Please. By an email.
Is there other things that need to be included in a memo besides the number?
No, it could literally be Warlow,
on a page.
center line radius is blah, Caleb.
Okay, cool.
It could be that simple. I need to know who it's from, obviously.
When is this one?
Wednesday. Wednesday, beginning of class. So tomorrow, we no longer have field work to do. We have our field shots done. We need to start creating the drawing. I downloaded the data collectors. Could you have done it yourselves? Yeah, it's not really that exciting. You plug it in and it looks just like a USB or an external, like it has a directory and you go and find your file and you download. There's two files. There's a raw file. So you remember when you did the traverse and you were writing down your horizontal angle, vertical angle, and slope distance? There's a raw file. You don't really need to know this. There's a raw file that it generates your coordinates for. What I did on our Google Drive, see how I have lab building point file? There's everybody's building points. Okay, so let's talk about the point file first before we import it. Your point file is going to be a text file. If it's ever a CSV file, isn't that the same thing? You just change the extension to .txt and it looks like this and it opens in Notepad versus CSV, which opens up in Excel. It's the same animal. Don't ask me why. Civil 3D, when you import a point file, it needs to be a text file. Okay. Comma delimited, which means that there's a comma between every column of data. So if you looked at this in Excel, the 1, 2, 3, 4, the point number would be in one column and the column line would be separated by the column. Okay. Now, I want you to take note of one thing. Notice that it is looking for a number in that very first column of data. So if your data set, because I think the big yellow data collector lets you put in anything there. Like you could put in benchmark or like you could put in text. It's looking for a number. Okay. So you'll have to change that if yours is different. The program won't import the file. The other thing is, if you have 0, 1, 0, 5, 0, 0, get rid of your leading zeros. Just make it 1 through 5 million or whatever it is. Who got 5 million points? All right, you got an A. You don't need to. Since we're both kidding. Okay. The other thing is, one group had a little bit of an issue that I noticed. Hopefully, you're going to be able to tease out what it's supposed to be based on photographs. What I mean by that is one group, all of their description is a hub. Hub, 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 hub. And it's like, okay, you're going to have to bring it in and maybe look at photos and try and figure out what it is. Okay. So point number, and it has to be a number, northing, easting, elevation, description. The description can be anything. The description can be numbers or letters. But this first column, all the way through the 1, 2, 3, 4th column, those are all numbers. This is just a sample set. This isn't anybody's points. This is my points. Okay. Follow what the formatting needs. If it's not this formatting, Civil 3D is not going to import. So all that to do this. You open up CAD. You could be in your base drawing. You could be in your traverse drawing. If you are in your traverse drawing, are your traverse points already in there? Yes. So 1 through 6 or 10 through 20 or whatever you numbered them, they're already in there. So the file you import, you might want to do a save as of it and erase those points because you can't duplicate them. They're already in there. So either go in and erase them. I would suggest doing a save as of the file, because if you don't do a save as the file and you have a problem, always have a breadcrumb trail to go back. Before you go erasing stuff, have this sort of parent file that you're not going to mess with. Everybody follow what I mean about if you're going to work in your traverse drawing, in your text file, you got to get rid of those first 6 points. Or you could erase them from the drawing or start a drawing from scratch. Those are also options. I'm not trying to drown you with information, but with CAD, there's about 5 different ways to do the same thing, and none of them's wrong. Okay. Did anybody not follow any? So,
Is it possible to make a copy of
Yep.
the traverse?
just copy it and call it for import or my happy point file or whatever you want to call it. Just copy it and rename it and then erase it. That's what I would suggest, because then you can always go back. Did I answer your question? Any other questions? All right. I think everybody is going to be amazed. Let's just do this. So we want to import our points, right? Go to points from the pull down. Go down to import export. And then over to import. Everybody see where I'm at? I'm going to go to import. And it brings up this string, import points. Okay. It's asking for a file and then a format. It doesn't matter which order you do it. It'll remember. So let's go get our file. So you hit your little green plus, right? And navigate to wherever you're working. I'm working on an external hard drive. And there's my point file. You're going to navigate to wherever your point file is living. Like I said, don't work off of Google Drive. Like work off of the computer's hard drive or your documents folder, or someplace more stable, right? Select the file and hit open. And it'll think for a second, and then it'll say, okay, that's what I'm bringing in. Now, these are all the different file formats that it accepts. So the letter designations are just what it is. N is northern, E is easting, Z is zenith or vertical. Elevation is another way of describing it. If I go down to the very bottom of the list and look for what matches my data set, P, point number, N, northern, E, easting, Z, zenith or elevation, D is description, comma delimiting. That is our file format. It's the very last one in the bottom of the list. Select that. This is how it's going to bring it in. It even gives you a preview of what it's going to look like. Make sense? Okay. You can add points to a grouping. Okay. Where this is helpful is if we were doing an acre of, if we were doing a survey of a 100-acre tract, and it's going to take us 10 days of field, I would put in field 2021-10-7 and track each field day as a group. I could track it for what I'm using for my surface model. So this just kind of is a housekeeping way of sorting different groups. Or in this case, I could sort it by different crews. Like if I was going to make one parent drawing and we were a big surveying firm, crew 1 through 8 gives me their files and I'm bringing them in as separate groups. Okay. I'm gonna bring it in and add it to a point group, but I'm gonna make a new group. And you can call it whatever you want. Okay? You can call it field, you can call it topo, you can call it crew one, you can call it the date. It's just a way of keeping track of it. Make sense so far? Okay. Do an elevation adjustment if possible. Well, if you did your traverse correctly, do you have to click that button? Nope. You did your traverse correctly. You want to do a coordinate transformation. You want to move it? Nope. If you did your traverse correctly, you shouldn't have to select either one of those. Now you hit OK, and it thinks for a second. Oh no. Where is my stuff? Zoom. Now, would you rather write it down, do all those turn that, or would you rather do this? Come on. Ooh, special, right? Okay. Let's take a look at these points. All right, you see how big the lettering is? Like, you can't make that out, right? Agreed. I have my elevations and I have descriptions. Okay. But I want to see the point numbers too. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select all of these. Right. Does everybody see how I did that? I just went up to the corner and drug across and I grabbed all of them. Okay. I'm going to right click and I'm going to go to properties. See how they're all points? You can change the style to basic or to whatever you want. I like this one. So it has point on the top, elevation in the middle, description on the bottom. This is the one I typically use because it gives me the most information. So I'm going to change mine to that. So now you see how I have, there's my point number, my elevation, and my description. Now all of these points are like really huge, right? They're super big. That's because right now, down here in the lower right, see this scale? 1 in 20, 1 semicolon 20. That's a civil engineering imperial 1 inch and 20 feet. So every inch in the drawing is 20 feet in real life. Okay, 1 semicolon 1. That makes the labeling huge, but I can make that labeling much more manageable if I change this to 1:1. Yeah. So now I can zoom in and out, and it's a lot easier to see that. From a drafting perspective, when you do your picture, you're going to want that to be whatever the scale of your drawing is going to be. Remember how we zoomed in and out on your traverse? You're going to want to play with that setting to get it to display. Like when you print your drawing, do you want your lettering to be this big? You want your lettering to be so small that you need a magnifying glass, right? A standard is usually between 0.08 of an inch and 0.12 of an inch. Okay. If I did 0.08 of an inch and I had a 50 scale drawing, this is my drawing scale. What is 50 times 0.08? 4 foot. So your text in the drawing would be 4 feet high. So that when you printed it, it prints out 0.08 of an inch high when it's to scale. Everybody see that? I'm just taking how high I want it to be on the paper, multiplying it by the drawing scale, and that tells me what it is in the drawing. Okay. Okay. Now, to connect the dots, these points, that little red X, that is called a node, N-O-D-E. Okay. So now, to draw, right, let's say this is a sidewalk, okay? Out around the edge of what I'm working. Okay, so the way I would start is I normally do everything by polylines. Why? Because polylines are at one elevation. If you do things with lines, it's going to grab the elevation of the two lines. And from a drafting perspective, that's going to bring challenges when you go to do hatches or other things. So you want to do polylines as much as possible. Now keep in mind, when you do polylines, it's going to grab the elevation of the first point that you select. And then it's going to hold that elevation all the way through. So that if you do the one side of the sidewalk, then the other side of the sidewalk. So you draw this and then you draw this. And then you connect the two ends and try to join them together. And it tells you they're not connected, but you're looking at it and it looks connected. That's because this is at one elevation and this might be at another elevation. So you want to make sure that they're at the same horizontal and vertical position. All right, to get things going together. More on that in a bit. Let's just get to the point where we're drawing. Okay. So these points out here, I know the road is curved. Okay. So I'm going to do a polyline. All right. But you don't eyeball that, right? You use your snaps. So I'm going to go from, if you hover over that little dot, see how it says snap to node? I'm going to grab my first point. Now, I could go and just connect the dots, node to node. But I'm kind of going around. What is this? Is it a straight line or is it a curve? It's a curve. Well, how do I get it to draw a curve? Well, polyline going point to point to point is just going to draw a straight line. Let me undo for a little bit. Same thing. But what I want to draw your attention to is when you start drawing, okay, take a look at the command line down here at the bottom. These are all the different ways that you can draw a polyline. Right now, it's just asking, specify next point. Tell me where you want me to go. It's looking for a straight line. But you can tell it arc. You can give the polyline a width if you want to. Right? But let's just start with arc. So A for arc. It's asking you for an angle, a center, a direction, halfway, radius, second. It gives you a bunch of different options. If you have a whole bunch of points that are going around the curve, just tell it that the next point that I'm going to select is the second point on that curve. So I'm going to tell it second. I'm going to scroll out. So in CAD, you can use the wheel on your mouse to scroll in and out, and the command still stays active. Okay, am I going too quickly? Okay. So now I'm going to select that second point on that arc and use your snaps And then now it's asking for the last point in it. Wow, look at that. I'm a draft person. So now, Pearson,
What if you were like mapping your top curve or bottom curve of the road? Can you select more than 3 points to map?
absolutely. So right now, I'm still in this, right? But you see how the curve's continuing? Okay, now all I have to do is select the next sidewalk, right? So my next sidewalk point is right here. I'm still on a curve, so it remembers the last thing you were doing. So if like there's 50 curve points, you just keep selecting your curve points. Did I answer your question? Tyra? Yes, what I'll show you next is something called running snaps. So if you're in a command and you don't want to constantly have to go click node, right? Right now, see the little magnet? If you select that and I turn on node, now if I hit OK, see how it's grabbing the node for me? So from now on, it's just gonna, if you hover over it, you don't have to select node every time. You just have to hit that little magnet. That's called running OS. Okay. Tyra, did I answer your question? All right, so now I'm gonna hit the next point on the curve. And now, you see how that kind of straightened out? But you see how I'm still in a curve command? I can be on a tangent and go into a curve, or I could be on a curve now. See how that's more of a straight line? Look down on your command line. I want to go back to drawing lines. So anything blue. So to go back to drawing lines, all I have to do is type L and hit enter. And then it's going to say, okay, now you're going to draw a line. Right? So that's kind of a little kink, right? So maybe it goes like that. So now I'm going to type trim and get rid of that portion of the line. Now, doesn't that look a little better? So now I know I go tangent, 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 and then do the curve. So now I'm going to do the other side, polyline. Oh, that's a water valve. That's not a sidewalk. There's a sidewalk. There's a sidewalk. Now, I know that's tangent. I'm going into a curve. Now I can say, I'm going to assume that this curve is tangential. So I want to start drawing A for an arc. Node to node. Ta-da. There's my sidewalk. Then I've got my driveway here, and I've got a house down here. So it's really going through now and creating lines and polylines to connect the dots of everything that I shot. Questions, comments, concerns? And everybody gets started tomorrow, drawing their base drawing, importing their points, starting to play connect the dots. Okay. Now, let's say, okay, this is a sidewalk, right? One of the things that's important is you want to be working on, you don't want to draw everything on the same layer, right? You want to have sidewalks on sidewalk layers, buildings on building layers. That way you can change colors and line types as you go. Okay? So more on that on Wednesday, but let's go down. C is typically for site. V is typically for existing conditions. And where that comes from is something called National CAD standards. So I'm just going to make a layer and call it sidewalk. How about like a bluish color? And I'm going to go up here and I'm going to make that my current layer right here. Little green check button. So I went and I created a new layer, which is up here along the top ribbon. Okay. And then I'm going to close that. Now I'm going to do a polyline from this endpoint to this endpoint. And then from here, this endpoint. Now, if I select this, right, and I go to properties, see how that elevation has a number assigned to it? That has a vertical to it, right? I want to change this to 0. But I also want to change all of the other segments. Because right now, they're on different elevations. They look like plan-wise, they're in the same position. But you see how it says elevation varies? Some are up here, some are down here. So if you change them all to 0, now what you can do is PE is polyline edit. I'm going to go through and I'm going to join all of these segments. So J for join. Now I have one closed thing. Okay. Now let's talk about hatches. Hatch is just H, right? You just type the letter H and hit enter. Select objects, right? We'll do that again. Type H, select the object. Type S to go to, or I'm sorry, type T, see down here to go to settings. Right now it's solid. I'm going to change this to concrete. I'm going to change the scale to 5. I'm going to hit OK. Too big. We go to properties. Let's make it smaller. Ooh, special. Created a closed figure. I created a hatch. Now it looks like a concrete sidewalk. Did I go too quick? Everybody feel reasonably comfortable